Hello, humans, whatever. I usually upload music stuff on this channel, maybe like once every year or two. Uh, but I've been thinking about doing something like this for a while, just talking about random topics I get fixated on. Um, so this is going to be about the Metal Gear Solid 1 PC port, a little bit about the PC1 integral port, which is, well, not port, version, which is what the PC port is based on. But I'll gonna do a little bit of a, I guess, intro here since I've never done something like this before. First of all, I cannot figure out a better way to record this audio. I used to have a much better mic I used for recording music. I don't have access to that right now. It's my brother's mic that I kept borrowing. I live in my own place now. I have been for like years, so I don't borrow his stuff all the time. All I have on me is this mic I got with a Rock Band 4 back when that came out. It's okay. It's not great. If I turn the gain any lower, then I just have to re-amplify it through Audacity, and then you still get all this static and stuff. So like that kind of sucks, and I'm not sure what to do about that at the moment. Um, it's just gonna have to be what it is for now. I use this mic to record the last song I did, but with all the editing and stuff you do when it comes to recording music, you know, you can get away with a lot more than you can just simply talking. And that's the other thing. Like, this is probably going to be sectioned kind of poorly for a first attempt. One of the things I keep thinking about is like how do people breathe when they do this, or how do you get over talking to yourself if you don't do this with someone else? Because that's weird too. Uh, so this also might be cut up in different ways because like I said, when do you breathe? I'm just rambling on. Uh, so there might be little stops, there might be whatever. I just kind of wanted to get this preface out of there since I've never done something like this before. So um, I definitely like a lot of other people. I'll ramble on about different topic points when I get to them and stuff. And I essentially what I've done here, and here's what I'm gonna do, is I have bullet points, and um, I did a little bit of research. That way, I'm not just talking from memory completely. Um, I'm gonna be saying a lot. Get used to this. It's gonna be the most unprofessional thing you have ever listened to. Uh, that's just how my brain works. Just pretend I'm talking to you as a friend, and you're trying to cut the conversation short, but I just won't shut up because I'm really interested in this topic, and you can't think of a polite way to make me go away. So you're just gonna put up with it and listen to it. So also, if the audio gets a little uneven, I also don't have like a mic stand by myself, um, or that I own myself. So I have this on a stack of books. I try to put it in a way where I'm not moving the mic too much, but I still have to remember like where I was sitting while I'm talking because this is gonna be cut up. Um, so yeah, that should preface it. That's what you should expect. It's just gonna be me rambling on about this, but yeah. So it's gonna be audio only. I'm not gonna have any visuals because I want this to be fun and easy for me to do too. That way, if I get super interested in something, I can just sit down and talk about it. I know I like to like find videos and stuff that are just like podcasts or just long form videos that don't need visual cues, and then it's just someone talking about something or two people talking about stuff. I really like that kind of stuff, especially when I'm doing other things. So that's kind of what I wanted to do for this. So kind of expect that out of this. So we're going to start with the release of this. We're talking about the PC port of Metal Gear Solid 1, which is based off the PS1 integral version, which was not released in America. So I have the section off in like bullet points. I'm not sure if I said that already, but so that was the integral version of Metal Gear Solid was released in Japan only in 1999. The Windows version was later released in 2000. Um, so we in America, well, I'm American. We got only the VR disc, but we got that later. The integral version is 3 discs. It's the normal 2 disc, like the original version, and on top of the VR disc, we got just the VR disc later. Uh, so then eventually what we're getting to is the PC version. And I'm going to talk about the PS1 version a little more later. I have different sections that I have just general guidelines of what I'm going to talk about when I'm looking into. And so that this is the fun thing. There is like no sources and no information about this game and this version, at least even more specifically the PC version. So I'm looking at the Metal Gear Wiki, I'm looking at Wikipedia, and I can find like four sources, maybe five. So I did look through the sources. I read what I could through the sources. So I'm gonna try to be as factual as possible, but I could easily get stuff wrong, and I probably will, because some of it I put here like question mark, like is this true? Is this not? I saw conflicting information too, which is not good because I'd like to be accurate, but I might not be able to. So if I get something wrong, you can totally let me know. Be fun to talk about this. That's the whole reason I'm doing this. I just want to talk about this. So if you want to talk about this, talk about it with me. Leave a comment. Let's talk about it. If I get something wrong, please let me know. I want to know everything about this that I can. So, anyways, the PC version based on the integral version, and I'm going to get to the integral version later, but I have this, like I said, in sections. So the first section I'm talking about is literally like the release of this. So I'll let you know what section I'm talking about. So the PC version was released by this company called Digital Dialect, and I looked into them for a bit. They did like nothing, and by nothing I mean like they had like maybe 7 ports under their belt, and I barely found any information about them. I was trying to look into them. I found an article for them. I think it was on PC Gaming Wiki, talking about their ports, and then I found like one stub of information on some other site. Like it almost looked like to hire them, but they haven't been. The last thing that had their name attached to it was from like 2010. So they did like a couple PC ports. They said that they did original games too, but out of the list I saw, none of those were original. It was like the one was like a DOS port of Battle Arena Toshinden. So, and the other stuff, I think there was like the Oddworld stuff, Abe's Oddworld. I don't play those, so if I'm messing that up, forgive me. But yeah, so it was ported over by this Digital Dialect company, which doesn't have much info on them to begin with. And interestingly enough, I kind of didn't see this one coming. It was published by Microsoft Game Studios, apparently. I might be saying apparently a lot because, not quite sure what's true, what's not. But yeah, it was published by Microsoft Game Studios back in 2000. The PC port was not in Japan like the PS1 version, but it was in Europe, it was in US, and I saw, at least on the Wikipedia article, not the Metal Gear Solid Wiki, or Metal Gear Wiki, that it was also released in Asian territories. I'm not super sure on that because their sources were like an Amazon link, but it was an Amazon link for the American CD release from back in 2000, and so I don't know where they're getting the info that it was released in Asia. I couldn't find that myself exactly, but apparently it was also released in Asia. But yeah, so the main takeaway from that was not released in Japan, interestingly enough. But I don't think, as a culture, at least especially back then, that they were super into the PC gaming side of things. From my understanding, now that I didn't look too into as well, but I've heard that before, and I still think, as a culture, they're very console oriented even nowadays. But I think PC gaming has picked up a little bit over there, from my understanding. So yeah, it was released Japan, not in Japan, Europe, U.S., and some Asian territories. Now, while I was looking into this, and this is my next section, this Japanese website for the integral version specifically, this was very interesting because this was one of the sources on the Metal Gear Wiki. So they have this Japanese website for the integral version for when it was released on the PS1. That had some really cool info. Now I ran this through Google Translate, and some of the sentences were a gold mine. But the main takeaways I have here are that they had this time trial competition for the VR missions, and I was really confused at first because obviously this is Google Translate, and like the first sentence I saw about that was Big Boss is like the winner or something along those lines, and I was like, that's confusing. Is that the name of the person or what's going on with that? But then a little bit underneath that, they had like the names of like the top 2 players or whatever. But yeah, they did like a competition for your times for certain VR missions. It looked like, and I thought that was really interesting. I can't see if they like won something out of that or anything along those lines. But I thought that was really cool. So they're essentially, speed running the VR missions, and you could send in your times. I don't know if there's verification processes. All I could see was just the text about this, but I thought that was really cool and really interesting. So they also on this website, because this is from, I'm presuming like 99, was that they're discussing the fact that it has an English dub in this version for the Japanese audience, which is cool. I wonder what. And see, this is the kind of stuff that's hard for me to track down. I wonder what like the Japanese audience thought of the English dub of this, like what they would have thought of David Hayter and stuff. That's like very interesting to me. Because obviously, like us in the West, we associate him with Snake and stuff, and we associate those voice performances and stuff. So it'd be interesting to see what they would have thought with the English dub of that. So the other thing on their website, they're talking about the additional very easy mode, which, from what I read a little bit, was similar to easy mode, except like I think they said infinite ammo for some stuff, maybe all the things. I never played the very easy mode, but that's the info that I saw. They're talking about Pocket Station support, which was this little peripheral for it was only in the Japanese market for the PS1. From what I remember, it's kind of similar to like a VMU for the Dreamcast. You could play like little mini games on it. And it had functionality with different games. Off the top of my head, I know Final Fantasy VIII was one of them, and some games, even in America, still have like Pocket Station support. I could go into that at some point because that stuff's very fun. But yeah, it had Pocket Station support. Specifically, it sounded like for unlocking certain stuff in the VR missions, like the Gray Fox mission, which was changed around for the VR American release to be, unlocked in a completely different method. They're talking about now. I'm not sure if this is still in the like PC release, the American PC release, about a new mode where the third playthrough that would have repositioned enemies. So I don't know if that's still in the PC port, but they were talking about that on the website. So that stuff is really cool to like read through the 99, presumably 99 Japanese website before the release of Integral and see like what was being said about it back then. I thought that was very interesting. The last point I have about the website, and now I don't remember if I wrote this down because I saw it on the website or not, but I think I saw part of this was about new codec frequencies. And I'm going to talk about those more later to do with the PC port. But essentially, there was hidden music if you called a certain frequency in specific spots, I believe, and then also like staff commentary, which was cut in the PC port. And I'll talk about that in a bit. The next bullet point I have here, and there wasn't much info on this, but I believe this was another one of the sources through the Metal Gear Wiki, was this like site specifically for the PC version for like America. And the one takeaway I had from that, and the other problem is like I'm running all this stuff through like the Wayback Machine because most of these sites aren't up anymore, so a lot of things are broken and don't work and stuff. But the main takeaway I had from that, which was interesting, is they had this like roughly like 50 megabyte trial version you could download, and I could not imagine how excruciating even that would have been for 2000 internet. But yeah, I don't know what's in the demo or anything. But yeah, they had that. That was kind of interesting to see that you could download a demo for it for the PC version. So there's just a little bullet point about that website. There wasn't much additional info on that site. It was like one paragraph and the trial version. It was just talking about, hey, it's Metal Gear Solid and it's on PC, and it's like, all right, cool. Anyways, so we're gonna get to my next bullet point here, which is the actual PC port, this is what I wanted to talk about because I've been going back to it this past week, and this port is so interesting to me. It's just so wild. I love looking back on like old late 90s, early 2000s PC ports because they were so wild, so all over the place. One of my favorites, and I think Digital Foundry was the one that went over this, but talking about the Final Fantasy VII port on the PC from back then. Like, this stuff is so fascinating to me due to like the difference of hardware and these companies trying to port it, and we don't know what their budget was, what their time was. So yeah, this stuff is so fascinating to me. And like, hey, if anybody has like a cool PC port they want to talk about or whatever from back then that was maybe really messed up or highly functional. Either way, just let me know about it, because I love this kind of stuff and I love talking about this kind of stuff. I'd like to see what other people, what they're into for this kind of stuff. If there's like maybe a certain game they played back then on their PC, because I didn't grow up with PC gaming. I was like consoles only. I didn't start like really getting into PC gaming until like a couple years ago. So I didn't grow up playing these PC ports. So it's really fun for me to go back now and read all about this and try them out and stuff. They're super interesting. So originally, here's some of my takeaway points with this PC port. Um, one of the main draws for it was the higher resolution. Originally, it could go up to 768p. Obviously, PS1 version 240p, but it's not always a good thing. And I'll talk about this later too from reviews from the time, which was cool. But yeah, it could go up to 768p through hardware rendering through your GPU essentially. But a lot of this stuff, and people have talked about this a bunch. A lot of these stuff is designed for the lower resolution displays because that can mask a lot of imperfections. There's, well, and this probably didn't matter so much back then now, but with all of us for the most part using digital screens, scan lines are super important. Art direction was formed around how it's going to be displayed, and a lot of these lower poly models and stuff, they're not designed to be blown up to higher resolutions, and they can tend to look a lot worse. And it's not like what you're looking at is worse. Technically, what you're looking at is better, but you're going to see a lot more of the imperfections super clearly. So it's not really a plus side in that sense. But yeah, the PC version go to 768p originally, which a lot higher resolution than PS1, but probably not a good thing. And also, depending on your hardware back then, there's a good chance you weren't getting up to 768p regardless. So, and this is the other thing that was interesting, is there was only 2 discs compared to the 3 discs for the Japanese PS1 integral version. The whole game was just on 1 disc, no swapping the disc, but the VR missions were a separate disc. So I thought that was pretty interesting. It had a CD-based DRM. That's probably pretty obvious. So you still need to keep your disc in while you're playing. It was not called an integral. It was just called Metal Gear Solid, and from my understanding, even on the packaging. But it is based off the PS1 integral version. But yeah, it's just called Metal Gear Solid. The font was different, and people have made current patches and stuff to try to restore the PS1 font. But the font for like subtitles and everything, that is actually different. And I want to talk a little bit about now too the difference between the software and hardware rendering. And I got a little note about this later too, but essentially, if you were running everything based on your CPU only with the software rendering, you were limited to 480p instead of the 768p if you're running through a GPU. So that was an interesting point I came across. And again, it's hard to find very specific info about this, and I wish I myself could benchmark this, but I don't have this kind of hardware laying around for these older PCs and stuff. But it'd be really interesting to try to run this with maybe common mid-tier hardware from like late 90s and kind of see how it handles compared to running the modern version on any PC through good old games. I'd like to see how it was actually running back then, to see how hardware intensive it was and stuff. And hey, if anybody did play that back when it came out, or they use an old rig and they have access to this, I'd love to know how it actually performed back then, because I couldn't find too much info about that, even reading reviews from the time as far as actual performance of it. I saw a little bit about the performance from this apparent developer blog post, and I'll get into that in a second, but I don't know how credible that post is either. But yeah, the software rendering without a GPU was limited to 480p, apparently, and then 768p if you had a GPU. But again, I don't know if that was feasible back then or if that was just the upper tier limit. And then we could also talk about the frames per second. It was still limited to 30, like the PS1 version, and as a lot of people know, a lot for these older games, if you try to increase the frames per second, like either it won't run, it'll mess up a lot of calculations, Uh, and this was still a common problem even up until like the PS2 generation. I know off the top of my head, I'm thinking of like Final Fantasy X, and I know a lot of people, especially with like the modern ports and stuff, complain that it's still 30 FPS. But again, that's one of those things where a lot of calculations and stuff are tied to the frame rate, and increasing it does not work in a very compatible sense. So, and most likely doubly so for back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it was still 30 FPS. Granted, you could run it at a higher resolution, but who knows how feasible that was back then. Um, Probably much easier to just get the PS1 version, but again, this is about these wacky ports and stuff and just talking about how they were. It's so fascinating. So my next bullet point here is, now this was super hard to find because even trying to run things through the Wayback Machine, like these links were breaking and stuff, but I wanted to see what did people actually think from 2000, like reviews from this PC port, and see what they were talking about it. And unfortunately, most of the reviews, the ones that I could actually read, they're mostly just talking about, hey, Metal Gear Solid is a good game. And it's like, yeah, that much is kind of obvious in that sense. But not too many were talking about like the port itself, or more just like, hey, you can play Metal Gear Solid on your PC if you didn't get the chance yet. You're in for a treat. It's like, that's great, but how is the PC version? So I only got like one like takeaway from this, is that it there was criticisms from the time that the graphics weren't like super updated or anything, that they were pretty much, it just looked like a PS1 game. That's like the only real criticism I'm seeing from these reviews from the time, is just like, yeah, it looks like a PS1 game. But the overall impression was still super positive, but from my understanding, at least from review outlets, not necessarily individual people, but from like publishing magazines and stuff, that hey, it's Metal Gear Solid, it's a good game. Not too much about the port itself, but I still figured that was interesting to bring up because I'm trying to read impressions from 2000 and see what people were thinking, and most of it was just like, yeah, you get to play Metal Gear Solid on your PC now if you didn't get the chance, which is, that's cool, but not too much about the PC port itself. So the next super important bullet point I want to talk about here is the differences from the PS1 version. Now, I myself have not played the integral version on PS1, so this is what I'm reading. I don't have a first-hand experience with that, but maybe at some point I will play that and give it a try and see if any of this is incorrect or anything, or if anybody has played the integral version on PS1 and I get something wrong here, again, like, please let me know, because I'd like to know more about this stuff. So essentially the first thing I'm looking at here was that the first person mode, where you could like play through the game in first person, was not an unlockable feature anymore. It was just straight available right away, and if you just pressed the equivalent of triangle twice, that you could just start the game like that, and you could just like start playing like that right away. So the first person mode was just available from the get-go. The other bullet point I have here was talking about how when you do the playthrough, when you have the tuxedo for Snake, is that Meryl had like her own sneaking suit that kind of looked like Snake's when you did that. That is not a thing in the PC version for some reason. That seems weird that had to, get cut out like that. And I wonder if it was something maybe wasn't working right, or they couldn't get the model to work right, and if they were just like, we already have a model that works, we know it works, let's just use that. But I don't actually know for sure. That's just me completely guessing. That's such a random thing to not be in there, because, like, you still have the tuxedo for Snake, but Meryl doesn't get the sneaky suit. I just think that's so bizarre and fascinating. It's like only half of that equation is proper, but the other half is just like, no, we can't do that. And I wish I knew why, but like I said earlier, there's no sources for any of this. There's like no info about it. The only first hand experience I can give is that I have the PC port through Good Old Games, and I've been playing that, and I played the original PS1 version as well. So I can only go off of first hand accounts for me and a couple sources that I found. So, anyways, next topic here is the Psycho Mantis boss fight, which obviously, if you're thinking about this, you're like, yeah, that's got to get changed. There's too many differences between memory cards and inputs and stuff. So the key takeaways here is that there's no reading your memory card. You don't get to know if you like Castlevania. Too bad. That's completely on you, and your controller's not going to be magically vibrated. He doesn't have those powers anymore. And this was cool. I didn't really think about this too hard, and I got conflicting info about this. But so when you're playing it on the original PS1 version, you can switch your controller port to hit him so he doesn't quote unquote read your mind. And for the GameCube remake, it's like switching it to port 4, which that was so cool when I played through that. I'm like, oh, port 2, but no, port 4. But yeah, for the keyboard, it was changing. Like if you're playing on a controller, you just change the keyboard, and then he can't read your inputs. Now, the thing that I couldn't figure out without like seeing this for myself is that I got conflicting info whether or not it was if you're already playing on keyboard, then you can switch the controller and it'd be like that. On I think it was the Metal Gear Wiki, I saw that yes, that was the case, or it might have been a source on the wiki, but then I saw a source on through the Wikipedia article saying that no matter what, the keyboard is just the control you want to use to not have you like to not get your quote unquote mind read through inputs or whatever. So I'm not sure which one of that is the case, but apparently at least everybody can agree on is that, if you're using a controller and you go to keyboard, then, he won't read your inputs, which was probably the best thing they could have figured with that kind of stuff. So this is something I noticed for myself, like firsthand when I was first playing the PC port, is that you don't have to save through the codec like at all. Now I think you still can, and I don't know if it's like technically a separate save from doing it, but you can just save. I think it's through like the escape key on the keyboard. I can't remember, but it's just like it opens up a menu that's like unique to this, and you have different save slots. There's like quite a few of them too, so that's completely different on the PC port instead of just saving through the codec. So that's pretty interesting that you have all these different slots and stuff to save, and you can save. And I don't think it's super like one to one. I still think it's like the codec where you save it and then you load it, and it's just going to be like generally what area you were in and stuff. I don't think it's super exact. Granted, I'm just going off of memory for that. I don't think it's super exact. I still think it kind of works like the codec, but you don't need to go through the codec. And the other point I want to talk about with this is that some of like the button descriptions are different too, because they're not saying like hey, press triangle or circle, press circle to like do this or call the elevators or whatever. It's press the action button. So obviously they weren't using PlayStation controls back then. And that is one thing I will say I love about modern PC ports is that for the most part, if you hook up a controller, you kind of see the inputs of the controller you're using. That stuff's incredible. You don't have to think about that kind of stuff anymore. But it's fun to hear like the different dialogue and stuff when you're talking about controller inputs, because you do have to take that kind of stuff into consideration when you're porting this stuff, especially back then. This kind of stuff was like the Wild West. There was no guidelines for these kind of ports in the sense of how they are now, where they're essentially 1-to-1 to console ports, with not counting graphical tweaking and stuff like that. But the fact that like you're getting the same experience. It's not completely changed in certain aspects, like all this stuff. So the next point I have on here, and this I do not know how true this is, but this was a source used on the Metal Gear Wiki, was this developer blog post from 2015, I believe, about apparently from a developer that worked on the PC port back then. So I don't know, he presumably was working with what was the name? Digital Dialect. So now I don't know how you'd verify this. I don't know how much you want to believe this. This could just be someone just parroting info that we already know about the port and just being like, yeah, this is the reason it's like that, and just making something up. But some of this kind of checks out from a programming point of view. So there's a lot of info on this. Some of my main takeaways, though, was talking about how the audio was different. And to me, this makes a lot of sense. So he's talking about how, as I'm sure some people know, but some people might not know, how like MIDI files worked and how they work. And they were used a lot back then, even with CD-based games, just to either save on storage. That's just how they wrote the music, or they weren't going to orchestrate something. There are many different reasons to use MIDI files. So essentially, it's like I don't know if anybody has used like Guitar Pro before. That's like the main example I use. But essentially, you're telling a sound font what noise or note or whatever to make. So, say like the PlayStation 1 has their own sound library and you give it. Now, I don't know how the PlayStation 1's sound library works and how the equivalent of MIDI files work for that, because I think they're called SEQ files for the PS1. But essentially, you'd be like, hey, essentially something like a text file. It's not a text file, but essentially it'd be like a text file saying like, hey, here's the number one, and then can you do this with it? And then the PlayStation's sound chip will interpret that like, hey, one means this noise or this note or whatever. So that's kind of how that stuff works. You're programming different sounds to be interpreted through the sound card. So that stuff's not one to one with PCs, especially back then. You can't just use the exact SEQ file and just have the PC version work or sound exactly like the PS1 version. So there were so many different solutions back then. And again, if anybody has specific ports they want to talk about with the music, I'd be super interested in hearing about that, especially if you have like audio or a different video you could point me towards to like go over different audio versions. Again, like going back to the Final Fantasy VII port, the different sound solutions they had to do with that, like that's super fun to listen to and hear the differences and stuff. So this supposed developer is talking about how they couldn't just use the SEQ files. So apparently that they used MP3 files they ripped from some fan site, and that's how they got the audio for the PC port. So I don't know how true that is, and they talked about being like embarrassed about doing that. But yeah, this supposed developer said like, yeah, we couldn't work with the SEQ files, so here's some MP3 files, and it's MP3 files ripped from recording audio essentially from the PS1 version is what I think they're trying to get at, and they got it from some fan site for their official PC port. So that's really interesting if that is true. And the other thing about the audio is that some of it is ever so slightly a different frequency, meaning some of the pitches are slightly lower. So some things are still off. I think the one thing I was reading too, I think this was info from the Metal Gear Wiki, and again, sources all over the place, whatever, you know that by now, was that stuff like the alert music was 30 seconds instead of 60, so it didn't loop properly. So some of the music's a little messed up. Again, I think there's been some fan patches to try to restore that, but it's not going to be a one-to-one thing with the PS1 version. Now, the other thing he was talking about, and I'm not quite sure what he was talking about, because he was explaining things in a way that don't make sense in casual terms without knowing all the lingo and info yourself. And I know some things. Other people, we all know about computers a decent amount and stuff. But the way he was talking seemed very specific towards his porting process and how things were back then. So I'm trying to translate what he's saying here, and like I can't make heads or tails of some of the stuff here, but he's talking about how they had this like 16 megabyte file limit for, and the thing is, I don't know if he's talking about just the executable, because he did mention just the executable like that was on the CD, or if he's talking about specific file limits themselves for like a singular file, because the game's not 16 megabytes, the game's takes up like a whole CD, so that is not the case. The game is not 16 megabytes. So I don't know what he's talking about there, but he's talking about how because of Windows, they had this 16 megabyte file limit, at least through the executable. He was talking about how it was a Windows problem that it couldn't handle more. So I don't know exactly what he means, but I figured that was an interesting point to bring up. He's talking about a certain file size limit that they had to work around with porting this. And the one other key takeaway I have here is he's talking about how another person was working on the software and hardware rendering of this. And this goes back to what I was talking about before, with the software rendering being completely CPU side of things and being limited to 480p apparently. And then him talking about how that someone was working on the hardware rendering too, and how that is capable of DirectX 3D from the time, which is part of the DirectX library. So that was interesting to see them talking about the software and hardware rendering side of things from a developer point of view. But again, this is all like hearsay. I don't see any like proof of this, but it's linked as a source on these sites, so I figured it'd be fun to bring up and talk about what he's saying. Now that could be true, that could be false, but it was worth bringing up. I thought that stuff was interesting, and if you know if this developer blog post is like real or not, you can check for yourself. It was the source on the Metal Gear Wiki. Let me know if you have any insight on that. I'd be interested in hearing about it. Next thing I want to talk about, we're going to be wrapping up probably in a bit here, but I want to talk about the pre Good Old Games version of it. Like, say you have the CD and you're trying to run it on modern hardware, CDs from trying to run it on modern hardware, or hardware from back then. So I don't have the CD-based version myself to check this out, but this is the reports of what I'm hearing about it. And by that I mean, like, all my info for this section is like coming from PC Gaming Wiki. Very, very good site for this kind of stuff if you ever need to know about certain ports, or how certain things work on PCs. But so apparently software rendering does not work on modern Windows, and again, we're not talking about the Good Old Games version. So software rendering just does not work properly, like, at all. Software rendering does not work. There's now this I wonder why. So they're talking about how there's slowdowns with the captions, like, like the subtitles, if you're using hardware rendering, which if you were running on modern Windows, you'd be forced to without patches. So there's slowdowns unless you turn off captions. I would love to know why that is the case. That kind of stuff's like really comical in the sense of like why is this causing slowdown? It's a caption. What error is going on here for it to be slowing all the processes down? The other thing I thought was interesting about this is that the like real life footage when they're showing different cutscenes does not work on modern Windows due to like a file incompatibility. So apparently you just see like a green square or something instead of like the real life footage playing. I thought that was kind of interesting. And if you do get software rendering to work through like a patch, that sometimes when you get a game over, the game just crashes. So I thought that was fun points to bring up. And if anybody is running the CD version and has insight on any of that stuff, please let me know. This is so fun. There's so many little quirks with this that we don't have to deal with the patches and the Good Old Games version. But yeah, that's just super fun to talk about and see how it was running and performing. And I wonder if any of these same issues also were happening back in like 2000. But a lot of these issues are like, hey, modern Windows. So, and the just due to how Windows works now, that the CD-based DRM doesn't even work, so you have to do something about that if you even want to run the game. So my last section I have here is just about the Good Old Games version. It's the version I have. It's the version I'm running. So just like a lot of these older games, it's wrapped with patches for modern machines. You can just run this. I've run this on an NVIDIA card, and I've run this on an AMD card, and it like modern equivalents of both of them. And because I did read something about the original version not working on Radeon GPUs, well, integrated GPUs, and well, I guess that's technically the Vega line of things, but it does work on an integrated AMD. It's what my portable computer runs on, and then it works too on NVIDIA dedicated GPUs, as far as my understanding, my first-hand experience. So that's a little different with the modern wrapped patches and stuff. It supports resolutions higher than 768p. So whatever your display resolution is, you can set it to that display resolution. Now, obviously, you're not going to be getting like better graphics out of doing that. You'll be running into the same problems as the original PC port. Well, this is the original PC port, but the original problem of like just because you're running at a higher resolution doesn't necessarily mean this game's going to look better. Everything is designed for 240p. But so say your monitor's 1440p, you could run it at 1440p. Say using a 8x5 screen that's 800p, you could run it at 800p. Now, it's still 4x3, so it's, even though you might be selecting a 16:9 or 8x5 resolution, it is 4x3 without additional patches. Now, I've never tried any of the widescreen patches, so that's just talking about without patches. It's still 4x3, but you can select like your monitor's resolution or under it if you need to. It supports anisotropic filtering. Now, I had to look up how you pronounce it. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but that's what Google's telling me. So it supports 16 times that filtering. And again, this is something that I never thought about like verbalizing, but is the 16x 16 times? I'm gonna assume that it is. So it's 16 times anisotropic filtering or nothing. But that's an additional thing with the Good Old Games version. And the other option it has is anti-aliasing. You get MSSA 2, 4, or 8 times. So that has a little more nuance than the anisotropic filtering. So those are new additions to the Good Old Games version. Personally, like, I don't think either of them look great, but the options there. Some people like them. Some people might like that. It's probably, honestly, at the end of the day, if you're going to be playing this game, you're not going to be playing this version probably unless you're like super interested in it. You're probably going to be running the PS1 version. But again, it's interesting to see these options like retrofitted onto something like this, so you can change those different settings around. The other main takeaway is like, just like I said before, even with this version, it's still a 30 frames per second limit. That's not going to be changing. I don't think there's even patches to try to change that. This game probably simply can't do that. Like, no matter what. No matter what you try to mess with, it's probably not going to be running above 30 FPS no matter what, if you can even change that somehow. So that's essentially the changes with the Good Old Games version, the version you could go download right now, because I think it's reinstated, because I know they took that down for a minute. Luckily, I grabbed that stuff before they did, like not on purpose or anything either. I just happened to get them on sale, and I think like a couple weeks later they're like, yeah, MGS2, MGS1 delisted. You don't get that anymore. That's something that, oh my god, yeah, that is something I'm gonna have to talk about at some point too. The Metal Gear Solid 2 PC port. Now that video would probably be like twice as long. I never even looked too hard into it. I've just like played it. I've played the PS2 version originally when I was like a kid. I played the Xbox version for a bit. Then I played the HD remaster on the Vita and 360, and then now I have the PC port, and I've run it through like with modern patches and stuff, even more than what Good Old Games wraps it with. There's a really good launcher for MGS2. I'm not going to get too far into that because that could be its own video. And hey, again, you know, if anybody wants to hear about that, you know, I'm probably going to talk about it anyways. So I'm pretty much done talking about this PC port. I think I got a lot of good info out there. It's all concise. Like, yeah, it's not visual, but again, that's kind of my goal with this, is just to make something that's like not super hard for me to work on. That way, you know, I actually feel like doing it and I still have fun doing it. Because now, if you don't want to hear about any of this outro, yeah, you're done. You can leave. I'm not really going to be talking about the game anymore. If you enjoyed it though, you know, please like talk about it. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's any specific games you'd like to hear about, because that's probably mostly what I'm going to be talking about. Maybe specific programs and stuff too with computers. I'll talk about console releases too, but yeah, let me know if there's any specific thing you might want to hear about. And if I played it, I'll talk about it. I've also always thought this would be fun too. So if there's like a specific game that I really want to talk about, and there's somebody else that like, hey, I'm super into this game too. Let's talk about the Metal Gear Solid 2 PC port, or just Metal Gear Solid 2 in general. Hey, you know, if you're super into that, and I could work something out with someone, and you want to talk about that, hey, I'll make a whole video with you, and we can talk about this kind of stuff. I always thought that'd be really fun. Get different people that are super interested in this stuff too. And, you know, there's going to be different people for every different game I might talk about. And so I could, you know, we could discuss different things. Or, you know, even if I find like one person that's super into multiple of the same thing, we could do this kind of thing too. So, you know, if that's something you're into and you got like a good mic and you see this video, God, I don't want to be mean, but if your mic's like somehow even worse than mine, I don't feel like trying to deal with that. But we could set up like a call. We could talk about it through... I don't know what kids use to call on computers. I have a Discord. We could do that. I don't know how you record audio. I can figure that out later. But I wanted to put that out there too, because I thought that would be super fun. If there's like a specific game you yourself would also like to talk about, not just me talk about, but you're like, yeah, you know what? I want to talk about such and such game or such and such port. Yeah, let me know, and I'd be super down to try to figure something out with that. I don't know how hard it would be and all that other kind of stuff, but I think that'd be super fun too. So if anybody wants to do something like that, so I'm gonna kind of wrap things up here. Like I said, I've never done something like this before, so I kind of, I hope someone has fun watching. So I don't plan on this blowing up. I don't know if anybody's gonna watch this. I'm kind of just doing this for my own sake. I just wanted to talk about this, and if even just like one person stumbles across this and be like, "Yeah, I really want to hear about the PC port of MGS1," then hey, perfect. I did exactly what I set out to do. So if you want to hear more of this kind of stuff, I'm probably gonna keep doing this for a while. There are so many different games I want to talk about. So just let me know. I think, what do people say? Like the video? Yeah, do that. I don't really care. Just let me know if you want to hear more stuff. I'm going to do it regardless. I'm going to talk about whatever I want. And I don't think I'm going to go in any specific order. I don't necessarily think, hey, I'm going to talk about MGS2 next. I don't even know how long I'm going to be doing this. I'm just going to do this for as long as I feel like. So if I end up like thinking of some specific idea where I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely doing this next, then maybe I'll put it in like the video description or something. But I'm just going to kind of take it as it goes and see what I feel like looking into next. Because it was fun to actually, for once, just sit down and look through all the articles, try to find the sources. But like I said, I'm not going to be messing with videos and stuff like that because for the time being, I don't want this like 3 hour project to turn into a 40-hour project. I kind of just want this to be something I do for fun, just to talk about it. Because that's all I really want to get out of this is just have fun with it and talk about certain ports and versions of different things or just certain games in general that maybe aren't getting covered a lot and stuff like that. So again, hey, if you come across this and you end up liking it, just let me know what you think about it. If you want to talk about any specific points that I brought up, please, I'd love to talk about it. If I got something wrong, again, let me know, because this is all about getting all this info down to like one thing, like the most important info down in one video. There's going to be certain things I didn't talk about. If something's like super important and I missed it, again,